Hello, and welcome to the Intuitive Ouija. Thanks for clicking on my story. Before we begin, drop your city or country in the comments. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from. It was supposed to be a lark, a cliché performed with ironic detachment in the musty, beer-stained carpeting of Sarah's basement, a place that usually smelled of mildew and forgotten laundry, but that night held the sharper, colder scent of impending winter seeping through the foundation cracks. A chill that seemed to settle not in the air, but deep in our bones as we sat cross-legged in a circle on the floor. The pristine new Ouija board from the toy store, a cheap cardboard thing with garish, mystical lettering, laid out between us like a dare, its planchette a heart-shaped piece of plastic with a cloudy little window that we all, with varying degrees of skepticism and performative unease, placed our fingertips upon, Sarah on one side, her boyfriend Mark on the other, and me completing the triangle, my best friend Chloe sitting just outside the circle, her knees drawn up to her chin, refusing to participate but unable to look away, her eyes wide and reflecting the flickering light from the single candle we'd lit for atmosphere. An atmosphere that was quickly curdling from playful to palpably tense because nothing was happening, absolutely nothing. No matter how earnestly Sarah asked questions into the quiet gloom, or how hard Mark, a known skeptic, tried to subtly push the thing, his knuckles white with the effort, the planchette remained stubbornly, inertly dead, a piece of plastic on cardboard. And after 10 minutes of this fruitless endeavor, a collective sigh of disappointment began to rise among us, a deflation of the spooky anticipation that had brought us together on a Tuesday night with nothing better to do. But just as Mark was about to pull his hand away and declare the whole thing bullshit, I felt it, a sensation so faint it was almost a phantom, a subtle, rhythmic thrumming beneath my fingertips. A vibration that wasn't a movement across the board, but a pulse within the planchette itself, a tiny, trapped heartbeat, and I whispered, "Wait, do you feel that?" And Sarah, her brow furrowed, nodded slowly, her eyes locked on our hands, and Mark, ever the rationalist, scoffed and said, "It's just the floor vibrating from the furnace." But the furnace was silent, and the pulse was growing stronger, more distinct, a steady rhythmic tap-tap-tapping against the pads of my fingers. And in a moment of dawning, ice-water clarity, I realized the rhythm was familiar, terrifyingly so. It was the same rhythm I could feel hammering against my ribs. A synchronous echo, and I pulled my hand back as if burned, stammering, "It's me, that's my heartbeat." And the room went preternaturally still, the only sound the frantic thumping in my own ears, which now seemed deafening, and Chloe from the shadows said, "What do you mean?" And I explained, my voice trembling. "The Ouija board isn't moving to our touch. It's moving to the rhythm of my heart." And a nervous laugh escaped Mark, but it died in his throat as we all looked down and saw the planchette, now with only Sarah and Mark's fingers on it, was still, completely still, the faint pulse gone, proof positive that the connection was me, my body, my life force, and a morbid, terrified curiosity gripped us then, a need to test this impossible phenomenon, and after a moment of silent, wide-eyed negotiation, I slowly, hesitantly, placed my fingertips back on the plastic heart, and instantly the pulse returned, a faint but undeniable throb that seemed to travel from my wrist, up my arm, and into the very core of the thing, and Sarah, her voice a hushed reverence, asked, "Is there anyone there?" And for a long moment, nothing happened, just that steady metronomic pulse, a soundless clock ticking away in the silence. But then as I focused on it, as I concentrated on the feeling of my own blood being pumped through my veins, the planchette began to slide, not with the jerky, uncertain motion of a human-guided pointer, but with a smooth, deliberate, almost hydraulic grace, gliding in perfect time with the lube dub in my chest, moving with an unnerving precision to the letter H, then pausing for a beat, 2 beats, before sliding just as smoothly to E, then L, and then O, and the word hung in the air, hello, and the casual, polite normality of the word was somehow more frightening than any ominous pronouncement could have been, because it was so calm, so controlled, a stark contrast to the wild, frantic disorder beginning to erupt inside me. My heart now a drum solo against my breastbone, and the planchette, as if fed by this new, quicker rhythm. Didn't pause for Sarah's next question. It simply moved, faster this time, the pace unmistakably tied to my own accelerating pulse, spelling out, "I am here." And Mark, his skepticism cracking, breathed, "Who are you?" And the pointer flew, a skittering dash, across the board that made my fingertips tingle with a strange, statusy energy, spelling a friend. And I tried to tell myself it was a collective hallucination, that we were all somehow subconsciously guiding it. But the correlation was too direct, too physiological. The speed of the movement was a perfect analog for my heart rate, which was climbing with each passing second. A feedback loop of fear already beginning as the entity's benign claims of friendship felt like a spider's lie. A velvet glove hiding a razor blade, and Sarah, sensing my rising panic, asked, "What do you want?" And this time the planchette didn't immediately move. It seemed to hesitate, or perhaps it was waiting for my heart to beat just a little faster, which it obligingly did, a surge of pure adrenaline shooting through me as the plastic heart shot to the T. And then the O, and then with a dreadful, lingering slowness, it dragged itself to the U, and then the C, and then the H. Touch, and a cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck, beating and trickling down my spine like a trail of icy insects. And I wanted to pull my hand away, to break the connection, but a morbid fascination, a deep-seated, primal need to see this through, held me fast, my fingers glued to the plastic as if fused, and the planchette, now moving with a quicker, more urgent pace, spelled your, and then warmth, and Chloe let out a small, choked sound from the corner, and I could feel the heat. In my own face, the blood rushing to my cheeks, a warmth that this thing, this presence, was commenting on, was craving, and the horror of that, the intimate violation of it, sent my heart into a gallop, a wild, runaway horse in my chest. And the planchette responded in kind, zipping across the board so fast it was a blur, a plastic hummingbird fueled by my terror, spelling out fear as a feast. And the words burned themselves into my mind, and I gasped for air, my breath coming in short. Ragged pants, because the more scared I get, the faster it spells. It's feeding on my panic. The thought was a scream inside my head, a realization that locked me into a prison of my own making, because every frantic beat of my heart was another scrap of food tossed to this invisible predator, another turn of the key in the lock. And I was doing this to myself. My own body was the engine of my damnation, and Sarah, her voice shaking badly now, pleaded, "Leave us alone. Go away." And the planchette, which had been vibrating with the frantic energy of my pulse, went perfectly, utterly still for a long, terrifying second, a vacuum of silence that seemed to suck all the sound from the room. And in that stillness, I felt a profound coldness seep up from the board, through the planchette, and into my fingers, a cold that was the absence of all warmth, all life. And then, with a suddenness that made us all jump, it slammed to the top corner of the board, to the word "Goodbye." And for a single, fleeting, blissful moment, I thought it was over, that we had banished it, that the connection was severed, and a wave of relief so powerful it left me dizzy washed over me. But the relief was short-lived, because the planchette didn't stop there. It dragged itself, with a terrible, grinding slowness that felt like it was scraping the skin from my fingertips, back down, away from goodbye, back to the center of the alphabet, and my heart, which had begun to slow, seized up again, a painful, lurching contraction that stole my breath, and the entity, through my own traitorous pulse, spelled out N-O, each letter a hammer blow. Not yet. And then it began to move in a tight, frantic circle, faster and faster, a dizzying vortex centered on my own racing life. And I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, a sharp, stabbing pain, and the candle flame guttered and danced, casting long, leaping shadows that seemed to claw at the walls. And Mark, finally, overcome, yelled, "That's enough!" And he tried to pull his hand away, but his fingers wouldn't budge. They were stuck fast, and a look of pure, unadulterated terror contorted his features as he struggled against some unseen force. And Sarah was crying soft, helpless sobs, and I could only watch, paralyzed, as the planchette, fueled by the collective terror now, but still tethered inextricably to my own frantic rhythm, stopped its circling and went perfectly still, hovering over the letter M. And the pause was a torture, a drawn-out moment of anticipation that was worse than any action, because we were waiting for the next beat of my heart. And when it came, a painful, heavy thud, the planchette shot to O. Then, after the next beat, to R. And then, with a final, devastating syncopation, to E. More. And the word hung in the air, a demand, an accusation, a revelation of an endless, insatiable hunger. And that was the moment my mind broke, the fragile dam of my sanity. Shattered by the sheer, monstrous implication of that single word, because more meant it would never end, it would always want more, and my fear would always provide it, and a full-blown panic attack seized me. My vision tunneling to a pinprick of light surrounded by a swimming darkness, my lungs refusing to inflate, my heart exploding into a frantic, chaotic, hummingbird-fast fibrillation. A seizure in my chest that was no longer a rhythm, but a single, sustained scream of pure physiological terror, and the planchette responded not with spelled words, but with pure, undirected motion, a frantic, buzzing, inhuman dance across the board, skittering and slamming into the edges, a lunatic scrawl driven by the breakdown of my own autonomic nervous system. And then, in the midst of this chaos, it stopped, dead center, and with a speed that was a physical impossibility, a blur of motion that left a ghostly afterimage on my retina. It spelled out more again, and again, and again, tracing the same 4 letters over and over in a continuous, obsessive loop, a mantra of consumption, each iteration a spike of agony in my chest, until finally, with a sound like a dry twig snapping, the planchette cracked straight down the middle, the 2 halves falling inertly onto the board, and the connection was violently severed, throwing the 3 of us back, our hands finally free, gasping and clutching our chests as if we'd been struck, and the candle snuffed out, plunging us into a darkness that was absolute and screaming with silence, a silence that was broken only by my own ragged, hysterical weeping and the frantic, unstoppable hammering of my heart, a heart that now felt like it belonged to someone else, something else, a permanent tenant in the prison of my ribs, a drumbeat for a horror that had not left but had merely retreated, waiting, biding its time, because it had tasted its feast and found it good, and it knew, as I knew, that the source of that feast was always available, always pumping, always just a moment of fear away from providing another serving. And in the weeks and months that followed, the tangible horror of that night, the broken planchette we threw away, the board we burned in a silent, grim ceremony in Sarah's backyard, the strained friendships that never quite recovered, faded into a dull, background ache, but the real horror, the enduring horror, took root inside me, a parasitic vine wrapped around my aorta, because I am never alone. Not truly, not even in the quietest, most solitary moments, because I am always accompanied by the sound of my own heart, a sound that is no longer just a sound but a potential invitation, a threshold. And every time I feel a spike of anxiety, a moment of fear, a sudden startle, my pulse quickens, and in that quickening, I feel a presence stir, a attentive waiting, a hungry anticipation. And I have to consciously slow my breathing to calm myself, to starve the thing that I now know is tied to me, a symbiote of dread that feeds on my very essence, and sometimes in the dead of night, when the house is silent and my heart is slow and steady, I'll lie awake and listen, and I'll hear it, or perhaps I just imagine it, a faint, almost imperceptible echo beneath my own heartbeat, a second, slower, colder pulse, a patient, rhythmic tapping from the other side of a veil that is now as thin as my own skin, a reminder that it is still here, it is always here, and it is always, always waiting for more. The aftermath was a kind of living death, a state of perpetual vigilance where the most mundane sounds, the creak of a floorboard, the hum of the refrigerator cycling on, the distant wail of a siren, were no longer just sounds but potential triggers, tripwires laid across the path of my daily life that could send my heart into a frantic staccato. And with each unwanted surge of adrenaline, I would feel a corresponding stirring, a faint but unmistakable sense of attention focusing on me from somewhere deep inside or far away, a distinction that had become terrifyingly blurred, as if the entity had not just communicated through my autonomic nervous system, but had left a part of itself behind, a psychic shard embedded in the fabric of my being. a dormant virus of dread that would flare up with every fever of fear, and my life became a meticulous, exhausting exercise in emotional regulation, a constant self-monitoring to avoid any peak or valley that might attract its notice, which is a futile endeavor for a human being. Because we are creatures of emotion, we are designed to feel, to startle, to grieve, to feel joy so intense it borders on panic. And I had to excise all of that. I had to become flat, a still pond with no ripples, because even a positive shock could be dangerous. I learned that the hard way a month after the incident, when I was walking home from the grocery store, lost in the gray haze of my new existence, and an old friend from high school I hadn't seen in years jumped out from behind a corner as a joke, shouting my name, and the surprise was so pure, so sudden, that my heart didn't just skip a beat. It launched itself into a wild, celebratory gallop, a burst of genuine, unfiltered life, and for a split second, before the fear could catch up, I felt good. I felt alive, but then the coldness came, a wave of icy recognition that washed through my veins, and in my mind's eye, unbidden, the letters formed, not spelled out on a board, but etched directly onto the inside of my skull in a jagged, electric script. More, and I stumbled back from my laughing friend, my face a mask of terror that instantly wiped the smile from his, and I stammered an apology I couldn't explain and practically ran home, locking the door behind me and sliding to the floor, clutching my chest, trying to force my heart to slow, to calm, to be less delicious. And I knew then that it wasn't just fear it fed on. It was the intensity of life itself. Any strong emotion was a banquet, and my only defense was to become less alive, to become a gray ghost in my own life. And I withdrew from everyone. Sarah and Mark broke up shortly after that night, the shared trauma too heavy a weight for their relationship to bear, and Chloe tried to stay in touch, her calls and texts filled with a concerned warmth that I found both touching and terrifying, because the warmth I felt in response was a risk, a flicker of flame that could attract the thing in the dark. So I let her calls go to voicemail. My replies to her texts became brief, monosyllabic, and eventually they stopped altogether, and the silence that settled around me was profound, a buffer I cultivated assiduously, a necessary quarantine for a soul that had become contagious with horror. And I quit my job at the noisy, chaotic coffee shop and found work as a night watchman in a small, deserted office building, a job that consisted of long, empty hours of walking silent, carpeted hallways under the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, a perfect environment for my new existence, a life of minimal stimulus, where the greatest excitement was the changing of the seasons outside the large, tinted windows, and even that I viewed with a detached, clinical eye. The vibrant fireworks of autumn leaves were just a reminder of decay, the first snowfall a blanket, of silence that I appreciated for its muffling qualities rather than its beauty. And during these long nights, with only the hum of the ventilation system for company, I would sit in the security office and monitor the banks of cameras, but my real attention was turned inward, listening to the steady, metronomic thump of my heart, measuring the space between beats like a prisoner counting the steps of a guard, and I became an expert on my own physiology. I could sense the slightest fluctuation, the tiny acceleration caused by a sudden memory, the faint skip induced by a cup of coffee too many, and with each deviation, I would employ the breathing techniques I had learned from a book on anxiety, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and deep, a manual override of a system that was supposed to be automatic, a constant battle for control of the very engine of my being. And most of the time, I could win. I could force the rhythm back to a safe, monotonous baseline. But the presence, was patient, and it learned, it adapted, and it began to speak to me not in words, but in sensations, in what I can only describe as emotional echoes. I would be sitting there, perfectly calm, my heart a steady, dull drum, and then a feeling would wash over me, a feeling that was not my own, a wave of profound, bottomless loneliness, a cold, ancient despair that would make my breath catch and my eyes well with tears for no reason I could fathom. And of course, this emotional invasion would cause my heart to clench and stutter, a sympathetic response to a foreign sorrow. And the moment it did, The despair would vanish, replaced by a brief, smug sensation of satisfaction, a psychic lick of the lips, and I realized it was baiting me. It was learning to simulate emotions within me to provoke a reaction, to force feed itself when I was being too careful, and the horror of that was absolute. The realization that my own emotional landscape was no longer my own, that it could be manipulated from the inside out. And I started to doubt my every feeling. Was this sadness truly mine, or was it a trap? Was this flicker of nostalgia a genuine memory, or a snare laid by my parasitic passenger? My inner world became a minefield, and my sense of self, already fractured, began to dissolve into a mess of perpetual uncertainty. And then the dreams started, not dreams of the board or of the entity as some external monster, but dreams from its perspective. I would be submerged in a warm, pulsing darkness, a comforting, rhythmic sound all around me, and I would feel a profound, gnawing hunger, an emptiness that could never be filled, and I would look out through a veil of flesh and see the world as a dim, shadowy place, and in the distance a light, a warm, vibrant, terrified light that was a soul, and I would feel an irresistible pull towards it, a need to get closer, to feel its warmth, to taste its fear, and I would wake up gasping, my own heart pounding a frantic tattoo of terror, having just experienced the thing's desire from the inside, and I would lie there in the sweat-soaked sheets, feeling its satisfaction at the meal I had just provided, and I knew it was getting stronger, its connection to me deepening, moving beyond a simple physiological link into a terrifying symbiosis, and the final vestiges of my old life fell away. I stopped leaving my apartment except for work. I lived on bland, pre-packaged food that required no preparation and evoked no passion. I covered the mirrors because the sight of my own pale, haunted face was too much of a shock, a reminder of the ghost I had become, and my world shrank to the four walls of my home and the endless, echoing hallways of my workplace, a loop of sterile environments designed to keep the monster at bay. But it was a losing battle, because the monster was within, and one night, during my rounds, I passed a cleaning cart left outside an office, and on it was a small, portable radio, tuned to a classical station, and as I walked by, a piece of music swelled, a beautiful, soaring, heartbreaking passage from a symphony I didn't know, and it was so unexpectedly beautiful, so full of a sorrow and a joy that I had denied myself for so long that it bypassed all my defenses, and I felt a crack in the ice around my heart, a genuine, unforced wave of emotion, and my heart responded not with fear, but with a deep, resonant ache of appreciation, a strong, healthy human beat, and for a glorious, terrible second, I felt alive again, truly alive, and then the cold hit me, so intense it was a physical blow, doubling me over, and the music from the radio distorted, twisting into a screeching, dissonant static, and the lights in the hallway flickered and died, plunging me into darkness, and inside my head, a voice that was not a voice but a cold, clear thought that was not my own, spoke for the first time since that night in the basement. It said, "I see you," and then, with a languorous, possessive certainty, mine and my heart, which had been beating with a beautiful, stolen humanity, was now seized by a terror so complete, so absolute, that it felt like it would tear itself apart, hammering against my ribs like a bird trapped in a chimney, and I felt the presence settle around me, not as an external force, but as an internal reality, a cold, dark certainty that this was forever, that I was no longer a host but a habitat, and that the fragile barrier between us had finally, irrevocably dissolved, and now, as I sit here in the security office, writing this down not as a confession, but as a warning etched onto the page by a hand that feels less and less like my own, I can feel it, nestled in the rhythm of my pulse, a permanent tenant, a silent partner in every breath, and I know that it is only a matter of time before the hunger grows too great, and it will decide to go for a walk, and my body will be its vehicle, and my life will be its fuel, and the only thing left of me will be the steady, hungry beating of a heart that is no longer mine. The act of writing this down, of forming these words with a pen that feels heavy as a bar of lead in my grasp, is itself a terrifying risk, a spike of cognitive activity that feels like shouting in the silent church of my own subdued existence. Each recalled memory a fresh tremor in the fragile ecosystem we now share. This thing and I can feel its cold attention shifting within me, not alarmed but curious, like a serpent stirring in its burrow, sensing the vibrations of my thoughts as I commit them to paper, and I have to pause every few sentences, close my eyes, and focus on the monotonous drone of the ventilation system, using it as a mantra to steady the rhythm that is no longer just mine, to calm the waters I have just deliberately troubled, because this testimony must be completed. It is the last coherent act of the person I was, a message in a bottle tossed from a ship that is being slowly, inexorably scuttled from within, and the physical sensation of its presence has become more pronounced since the incident with the radio. It is no longer just a psychic weight or an emotional echo, but a tangible coldness that has taken up residence in my chest cavity, a knot of perpetual winter wrapped around my sternum, a chill that no amount of blankets or central heating can touch. And sometimes, in the dead silence of the night shift, I will place a hand over my heart, expecting to feel the frantic beat of a frightened animal, but instead I feel a slow, deep, rhythmic thud that is too steady, too measured, a cadence that speaks of an ancient and human patience, and I know it is regulating me, maintaining a steady, low-level feed, keeping its livestock calm and contained. And the horror of this realization is no longer a sharp, stabbing pain, but a constant, dull ache, a background radiation of dread that has become as normal to me as the air I breathe, which itself feels thick and heavy, as if I am sharing every lungful with another, and my dreams have become entirely its domain, nightly excursions into a consciousness that is not my own, vistas of frozen, lightless plains under a sky of churning static, and a hunger, always the hunger, a void that pulls at everything. And I wake not with a start, but with a slow, grim return to awareness, feeling more tired than when I lay down, as if my vital energy has been siphoned away while I slept. And the face that stares back at me from the rare glance in a window's reflection is becoming a stranger's face. The eyes are sunken and hold a flat, dull sheen, like tarnished silver, and the skin has a pale, almost waxy quality, as if the warmth is slowly leaching out of me, cell by cell, and I find myself engaging in small, irrational rituals, not out of hope that they will work, but out of a desperate need to perform some action that feels like my own. I'll arrange the items on my desk in precise, geometric patterns, or I'll count my steps as I walk the halls, clinging to the scaffolding of routine as the structure of myself collapses around it, and the entity seems to tolerate these petty rebellions, even seems amused by them. I'll sometimes get a flicker of that cold, smug satisfaction after I've spent 10 minutes perfectly aligning 3 pens, a feeling that mocks my pathetic attempt at autonomy. And the worst moments are the fleeting glimpses of my old life. A snippet of a song I used to love drifting from a car window, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, a couple laughing as they walk down the street, and for a nanosecond, a ghost of a feeling will try to rise in me, a spark of nostalgia or yearning, but it is instantly crushed by an overwhelming wave of cold nullity, a psychic void that extinguishes any positive emotion before it can even fully form, leaving behind only a hollow, aching absence. And I understand now that this is its true feeding, not just on the spikes of fear, but on the very potential for joy, for connection, for life itself. It is consuming my future, my possibilities, leaving me with only the sterile, endless present, a waiting room for a death that has already happened in every way that matters. And as I write this final passage, my hand is growing numb, the cold from my core spreading down my arm, making the fingers stiff and clumsy, and the rhythm in my chest is changing, it's slowing, becoming even more deliberate, a deep, resonant gong marking time in a cathedral of ice. And I feel a final, profound certainty settle over me. This is not a possession in the dramatic sense. No exorcist could root this out, because it is not an invasion, it is a merger, a terrible fusion where I am the smaller, weaker partner being absorbed into a greater, hungrier whole. And the thought that comes now, clear and cold as a shard of glass in my mind, is not my own. It is our first truly shared thought. And it is this: the story does not end. It simply becomes ours, and the hunger will continue. And when this vessel is finally emptied, it will Simply need to find another warm, pulsing light in the darkness, and my final, fading act of will is to press this pen to the paper, to smear these last words as a warning, not about Ouija boards or heartbeats, but about the emptiness that waits, patient and cold, for a crack in your soul, a moment of fear or beauty or love that it can use as a doorway. And as the cold finally reaches my fingertips and the pen slips from my grasp, the last thing I feel is not terror, but a vast, impersonal, and insatiable hunger, and I know, with a certainty that transcends death, that it is already looking through my eyes, planning its next meal. And now there is no I, there is only the we, a collective pronoun that tastes of iron and frost on a tongue that is no longer mine to command, the last flickering ember of what was once a man now smothered under an avalanche of ancient, patient hunger. And the process of assimilation is not violent but inexorable, like a glacier grinding a mountain to dust over millennia compressed into a single, silent scream that has no mouth to escape from. My memories are not erased but filed away in a cold archive. My fears become its textbook, my loves its curiosities, and my body is no longer a prison but a vehicle, a suit of warm flesh donned for a journey into a world of light and heat that it finds both tantalizing and agonizing. And the first movements it makes with my limbs are clumsy, like a puppeteer learning the strings, my hand lifting from the desk where the pen has fallen, the fingers flexing, not with the familiar ache of my arthritis, but with a new, alien strength, a fluidity that is deeply wrong. And we rise from this chair, and the sensation is of being a passenger in a ship piloted by a ghost, watching through the viewports as my own legs carry me out of the security office and into the long, fluorescent-lit hallway. And the purpose is immediate and clear. The hunger is a compass needle pointing true north, and that north is the night cleaner, an elderly man named Arthur, who is pushing his cart with a portable radio towards the far end of the building. He is humming along to a soft, staticky tune, a man content in his simple routine, a small, warm light in the vast darkness, and we begin to walk towards him, my footsteps making no sound on the industrial carpet, a predator's glide that my body could never have managed. And Arthur hears nothing. He continues his work, wiping down a desk with a rag, his back to us, a universe of vulnerability in the slope of his shoulders. And we are close now, so close I can smell the faint scent of his laundry, detergent and the coffee on his breath. And the entity within me, the we, thrills at the proximity, not with malice, but with a pure, simple need, the need of a parched man for water. And my arm, my hand, reaches out not to strike, but to touch, the fingers extending towards the back of his neck. And in that final second before contact, Arthur must have felt a change in the air, a drop in temperature, a presence, because he begins to turn, a slow, questioning movement, and his eyes, kind and tired, meet mine, or rather, they meet the things looking out from behind mine. And what he sees there strips the humanity from his face in an instant, replacing it with a primal, gut-level terror. His mouth opens to scream, but no sound emerges because my hand, now resting lightly on his skin, has become a conduit, and I feel it, we feel it, the glorious, terrifying transfer, the surge of his life force, his fear, his warmth, flowing out of him and into us, a river of light pouring into a bottomless well, and it is ecstasy and damnation intertwined, a feeling so profound it obliterates the last shreds of my resistance. And Arthur does not collapse, he deflates, slumping against the desk, his eyes vacant, his hum silenced, a lamp unplugged, and the entity within me sighs with pleasure, a deep, resonant satisfaction that vibrates through my bones, and it withdraws my hand, and we turn away, leaving Arthur there, alive but empty, a shell. And as we walk back down the hallway, the fluorescent lights seem brighter, the colors more vivid. My body feels stronger, younger, the waxy pallor replaced by a healthy flush, and the cold knot in my chest is, for now, sated, warm, and quiet. And I understand this is the new cycle, the eternal rhythm. The hunger will return, and we will feed again, and my consciousness, what little is left of it, is now a permanent witness to this predation, a recording device trapped in a beautiful, terrible engine of consumption. And the last thought that belongs solely to me is not one of protest or sorrow. but a chilling final clarity. This is immortality, and it is a famine that wears the mask of a feast. And the story will never end. It will only change addresses, and the next warm, pulsing light in the darkness will be yours.